Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and in this week's episode, I'll be talking about my recent trip to visit my family in England and what I ate on the road, or rather in the air, and also while I was in the UK, and also how my body responded to the change in my diet and in when I was eating. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources about how to get rid of cravings, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at MyLifeAfterSugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_LifeAfterSugar. Okay, so you can probably hear from my accent that I come from the UK, and a lot of my family is still there, even though I moved to Quebec in Canada over 35 years ago. And I haven't been back to the UK since way before COVID, so it's been several years. And every time I go back to the UK, I feel like half of me is back home and the other half of me is like a stranger in another land. Not just because they drive on the other side of the road or because I've forgotten what the money looks like, but just because I'm kind of 35 years out of date about how things function in the UK. So even if technically this trip was a family visit rather than a voyage of discovery, it still required a certain amount of readjustment and planning because we were somewhere else and I was out of my routine. And recently I asked the listeners of this podcast if it would be helpful for me to make an episode about what I ate while I was travelling to and from the UK. I went with my daughter Lily, by the way, and also what I ate and when I ate or didn't eat when I was over there. So the first thing you need to know is that over the years I've learned to bring along with me in my hand luggage a bag of mixed nuts. Either I roast and salt them myself, or in this case, because I just didn't take the time, I brought along ready salted roasted nuts and a mix of nuts, cashews, almonds, hazelnuts, Brazil nuts, and so on. And it's not ideal to buy them ready roasted and salted because some brands use refined seed oils to roast the nuts. So ideally, I would buy my own nuts raw, soak them because that helps my digestion, and then roast them in the oven at a low heat, and then salt them to taste. And bringing along a little Ziploc bag of nuts causes absolutely no problems with customs. I've never been stopped for having them in my hand luggage, and they're there, well, just in case. Now, in the past, I've asked airlines to provide me with either a gluten-free meal or a meal for diabetics. And in both cases, it was a complete disaster and I still couldn't eat 90% of the meal provided. So this time, I just let it be and decided to choose whatever meal was offered to me. And on the way over, if my memory serves me right, there was a choice between a pasta dish and chicken in some kind of sauce, with rice. So I chose the chicken dish and I just ate the chicken in the sauce, and I didn't worry about if there was added sugar in the sauce. You know, you just got to pick your battles, and the food was okay. I didn't eat the rice, and I took the little pat of butter that they give you with the bread and added the butter to the chicken, and I ate the salad, drank water, no alcohol, especially not in an airplane, because for me, even on dry land, alcohol makes me sick, and in an airplane it's even worse. Believe me, I've tested it. So really, the food wasn't a huge issue, except for the time that it was served. I mean, I'm not used to eating at that time of night, which was about 10 p.m. I mean, I could have fasted through the flight, but I chose not to. But what I do suffer from is jet lag, and the trip from Montreal to London is always overnight. So added to the 7-hour flight and the 5-hour time difference is also pretty much missing a night's sleep. Because even if I manage to sleep a couple of hours, it really puts my system upside down. So that was the most difficult part. When we landed, it was early in the morning, and I'd already booked a coach to take us to Coventry, which is where I went to school and where I was meeting up with a school friend of mine who we were staying with for the first few days. And I'd booked one night at a hotel just to let us crash out, which ended up being one of the best decisions of the trip. And luckily for us, our hotel was right next to a shopping centre, and in the shopping centre there was a Marks and Spencer's, which is one of my favourite places to buy food. And so I went there and bought some plain yoghurt, some British strawberries that were in season, and some lovely double cream that I'm so happy to report both single cream and double cream have no additives, which is wonderful. And double cream, by the way, has a higher fat content than single cream, kind of the equivalent of heavy whipping cream in North America. And I also bought some sausage rolls, which I never eat when I'm home, but which remind me of my childhood. And basically these are little pieces of ground meat, like sausage meat, wrapped up in pastry, which, as you probably know, I don't eat flour-based products, but again, I made an exception and I bought some sausage rolls and I ate them, and yes, I enjoyed them, and let's just say I regretted it a few hours later because my system is so unused to wheat flour that whenever I do eat any, it really affects my digestion. But again, that was my choice, and I had to accept the consequences. A couple of days later, while we were staying with my friend, I decided to treat the whole family and to get everyone fish and chips from the local chippy or from the local fish and chips shop. So we walked down there, I ordered fish and chips for everybody, not in newspaper, but in regular paper, and brought everything back home so that we could enjoy this typical English dinner that, again, reminded me of my childhood. And I love putting lots and lots of malt vinegar on my fish and chips, and I ate the fish, even though it was battered, and I ate the chips, although I don't eat them with ketchup anymore, and it was delicious. And this fish and chip dinner came at the end of a pretty busy day where we'd just been to Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare was born. And while we were there, we went to a restaurant chain called Wetherspoons, and I ordered a typical English fry-up, which is basically bacon and eggs and sausage and baked beans. You know, a typical English breakfast. Also, a lot more than I'm used to eating. But again, I wanted to relive my childhood memories. So that day, I had the fry-up at around 11 a.m. and the fish and chip dinner at around 7 or 8 p.m. And eating 2 full meals a day is not something that my system is used to, especially with so much fried food. And, well, my body reacted in quite a violent way later on that night. And if you want to know what happened, and I promise I'll spare you the gory details, I'll tell you right after this short break. I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews, like this one from Patty VO from the USA, whose 5-star review says, "Sugar is a big problem for many people and I'm one of them. Listening to Netta's podcast is a good habit to adopt. Each time I listen, I get a bit more inspiration and, most importantly, good information that helps me cut back and hopefully one day give up sugar. Thanks, Netta." And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. Okay, so just before the break, I was telling you that after a typical English fry-up plus a fish and chips dinner, my body reacted pretty violently. But what I also have to tell you is that before we left for England, I actually had to take a round of antibiotics for a sinus infection, something that hasn't happened to me for many, many years. And of course, I'm way more used to consuming my own probiotic foods and drinks rather than having to take antibiotics. So that in itself was a huge change to my system, as well as, like I was saying, the jet lag, the change in times and what I was eating. Well, all that together meant that later on that night, well, let's put it politely, my body rejected what I had put in it on both ends. And it was a good 12 hours, or maybe more, before I had emptied myself out, shall we say. Not fun, but also a good lesson to not push your body too much. I mean, I didn't eat sugar because I just don't like the taste of sugary foods anymore. But I did push it too far by eating all that fried food. So, I can't really blame anyone but myself. Now, if I look back on my photos from our trip, because I always take pictures of what I eat and most of the time at restaurants of the menu, I see that once we went to a Portuguese restaurant and I had chicken with a tomato-based salad that was delicious. And once with my dad, we went to a Lebanese restaurant in London and I had a mix of lamb and chicken shawarma and a delicious yogurt and garlic sauce with lots of salad. Plus, when we were staying at my aunt's house, we ate really good food. For example, a coq au vin, which is chicken in a wine sauce. Plus, we went to a Turkish restaurant, and that was really delicious. But when we weren't staying with family, we were in Airbnbs with our own kitchen. And although I didn't make any elaborate meals, at least in that context, I was able to go to the supermarket or the grocery store and prepare our own food. And what you need to know is that I've traveled quite a lot in my life, and one of my favorite things to do when I'm in another country is to go to the supermarket or the grocery store. I just love looking at the different foods, the different products, where they place the different things, the packaging. I don't know, it's just like a tourist attraction for me. And there are specific foods that I miss being away from England for so long, and one of those is Marmite. Now, I don't want to start up some kind of a debate with any of my Australian listeners out there who prefer Vegemite, but the fact is that I grew up with Marmite on toast, and even though I don't eat toast anymore, I still love Marmite. And I have to buy it online now that I'm living in Canada, but it was so lovely to see a whole display of Marmite on the shelves at the supermarket. And for those of you who don't know what Marmite is, it's a dark brown, salty, savoury spread made from yeast extract and fortified with B vitamins, and we put a very, very thin layer of it on buttered toast. Or that's how I used to eat it when I was a kid. And now I don't eat toast anymore, as I mentioned, but I do sometimes eat it on buttered Ryvita crackers. And Ryvita crackers are dark rye crackers, and sometimes I get the taste for them, and I eat 3 or 4 of them with butter and Marmite, maybe once a month or so. So while I was in the UK, I bought myself a nice big jar of Marmite, and guess what happened? Because we travel with hand luggage only, my jar of Marmite was confiscated at Gatwick on the way back home because they said it was more than 100 millilitres. I asked them to give it to charity, and they said they weren't allowed. Now, all in all, it was a pretty smooth trip. But on one of our trips, where we went by coach from Cardiff, the capital of Wales, where my dad lives now, to London, well, it was supposed to be a 4-hour trip, but the coach showed up almost 2 hours late, and then there was traffic on the motorway. Note to self, take the train next time. And the whole trip ended up taking 8 hours. And we didn't get into London until past midnight. Anyway, it was a bit of a nightmare. But remember that bag of nuts I told you about at the beginning of the podcast? Well, that came in handy because we weren't expecting to be in transit for 8 hours, and we were able to snack on those. Oh, and another really memorable place we went to with gorgeous food was at Harrods Food Hall. Harrods is one of the world's most luxurious department stores, and I took my daughter to Sloane Street with all the posh high-class shops, and to Harrods with their high-class shopping experience so that we could do some window shopping and so that she could see the food hall. It was such an experience for all the senses. It was just beautiful. And we were there with my dad, who at one point, where we were surrounded with beautiful patisseries and chocolates, he asked me, "Aren't you tempted by all of this, Netta?" And I said, "No, I'm not actually." And I told him that all my other senses were happy to see and smell all this beautiful food, and I honestly didn't feel like tasting any of the sweet stuff. In fact, I wasn't hungry at all. And that goes to show that it's totally possible to enjoy food in other ways. Of course, my daughter had to try some of the things, so she tried an Eton mess, which is a classic British dessert made of a mixture of fresh fruit and cream and crushed meringue. Plus, she bought herself some Earl Grey tea, of course. But I have to tell you a little secret, which is that I don't actually like tea. In fact, I never have, much to my grandmother's chagrin. And the only way that I drink tea is fermented into kombucha. So this brings us pretty much to the end of our 2-week stay in the UK. And on the plane ride back home, I also decided to just let them offer me whatever food was for lunch. And I chose, again, I think, a chicken dish. And I just ate the meat, which was okay. The salad wasn't good. It was some type of potato salad. So I actually ended up not eating that much. And I would probably have been better off just fasting through the flight. But, I like to try things. And if you've heard any of my other podcast episodes before, you may know that I still have a bit of a soft spot for crisps, or chips, as we say in North America. And while we were in England, I did have a couple of small packets of crisps. Again, just for a trip down memory lane. One of them was prawn cocktail flavour, and the other was cheese and onion flavour. And that was as much of a trip down memory lane as I was willing to go. And one last thing that I really enjoyed in England was a nice glass of very dry cider. As I mentioned before, I don't drink alcohol, so one glass is enough for me. But what I love about English pubs is that many of them do offer really good dry cider. So of course, I couldn't say no. And I mustn't finish this episode without mentioning our sugar-free meetup that we had in Brixton in London. And several of my sugar-free intermittent fasting listeners showed up to a pub in Brixton, and we all had a lovely time drinking sparkling water. And then a few of us went around Brixton Market and had lunch there. It was lovely to meet a few of my listeners in person. So if you're listening and you were there, thank you for coming. So I hope this episode has shown you that it's totally possible to travel and to enjoy your food. And whether you make smart choices or, like me, sometimes not so smart choices, the bottom line is that it's your choice. And for me, that's really important in feeling that you have personal power and that you're in charge, not sugar. And this is what I mean when I talk about freedom. And that's why I created the Freedom from Cravings Formula 90-day program. And if you need some support and encouragement and guidance to get to real freedom from cravings, then my 90-day program, Freedom from Cravings Formula, may be just the thing for you. It's a program that's specifically designed for women over 50 who want to get rid of cravings and feel more in control around food, especially sugar and comfort foods. In the program, you'll get step-by-step guidance and customized support through the 5-step formula that I've developed to help you get control over cravings so that you can finally live your life with more energy and fit into your favorite clothes effortlessly and feel confident in your food choices so that you can ditch the shame and embarrassment that you feel every time your emotions make you slip or fall off the wagon, and so that you never feel like you're on some kind of a restrictive diet. If you're at the stage of your life where you're finally ready to look after yourself, let's chat. You can hop on a free clarity call with me at any time by going to aftersugarclub.com and clicking on the big green button, Schedule a Clarity Call. We'll have a quick 30-minute one-on-one chat to see if the Freedom from Cravings Formula 90-day program is a good fit for you. So go to aftersugarclub.com. Speak soon. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.